Hello, I'm Sally Pointer. As a freelance heritage educator, I know how important costume can be to education teams around the country. But costume can vary depending on the time period you're trying to portray. For example, if I do an 18th century project and I get the costume wrong, well, quite frankly, I haven't done my research because there's plenty of information out there. This week though, I want to take you along with me on a bit of a dress diary as I try and get to grips with the best way to represent a Palaeolithic outfit destined for use in a museum setting.
If you've been following my recent videos, you'll know that I've been working on a set of Palaeolithic costume for a museum, which is very nearly there. But so far, these costumes have all been everyday garments. And they really want, and I want as well, for there to be at least one outfit that represents really special occasion wear.
The problem, of course, with prehistoric costume is that whilst things like bone and stone survive quite well, things like leather and textile and fur really don't. So it's rather like putting together a jigsaw puzzle where you sort of know the general shape of the finished thing, but you've got no idea what the individual puzzle pieces are going to be like. And this does mean that there's a vast amount of guesswork that goes into any prehistoric costume. What we're aiming for then is something that provides plausibility with an understanding of how different materials and techniques work, to come up with something that, yes, it's an imagining of what something might have looked like, but it really does help evoke the time and place. A costume for prehistoric education use then is all about compromise, but every single choice that we make should be based on something, so the end result does help education groups get a feel for what might be going on. Now, although this tunic is going to take strong inspiration from this incredible burial from Sungir in Russia, which is roughly 30,000 years old, it's certainly not going to be an exact reconstruction. But I do want to draw really strong inspiration from it. Now, obviously, we're not using mammoth ivory beads. I've got lots and lots and lots of little bone beads. I'm going to be using probably 5,000 of them in this project. We're also going to be using a little bit of amber, some shells, some canine teeth. But before we get to the fun stage, and this is going to be fun, I've got to choose the right leathers. Now, I'm going to be working mostly with deerskins for this, and I've got quite a lot of choices in shades available. Now, this is just a very quick overview of a couple of excellent books. So, Teresa Camper's Determining Prehistoric Skin Technologies, which is really good. And a great favourite of mine, you can see how battered this one is, Perishable Material Culture and Prehistory by Linda Hercombe. And both of these very helpfully include a chart of different possible skin colours for prehistory. And I'm using those when I go through my stash of hides to see what might be useful. So these are the ones that I think might be good for this. One of the things I do have to bear in mind is that I want the beads to show up. So although this very pale skin is lovely, and we've used a lot of that in the shirts, I think for this project we want these lovely rich ochre ones and just a bit of the dark. I think that's going to show up really well. And texture's important. Some of these are really thick. That's not going to make a very good tunic, but these two, you can probably see how lovely and bendy those are. And this one's nice and supple. So my current thinking is to use the very dark for over the shoulders and sections of the sleeves, the ochre colour for the body, and hopefully the beads are going to show up really, really well against them. What do you think, Tesla? Do you approve those beads? Can you not hatch them for me? That really won't help. I really do want to make use of as much natural colour and contrast in this as possible. I think those are my final selections. So, almost blackish brown for the shoulders and some sleeve details, ochre for the body and the sleeves. I'm going to keep this cream and this lighter brown in reserve, possibly for some detailing, Might be a little bit of fur goes into it. We might also make a hat, because there are definitely headwear pieces associated with this period. I think that'll do for starters. Now, education costume is always about compromises. It's got to fit both the budget and the wear and tear and the way it's going to be used. And the next thing we need to sort out is what we sew it up with. This is the ideal. This is backstrap sinew. This, I think, came from an elk, possibly a moose. Terminology varies between the US and the UK, so I'm never quite sure what I've got. And this splits into beautiful ribbons that can be used to sew with. It's a joy to work with. Unfortunately, it's not that easy for me to get hold of, and it does slow things down. And this is a consideration where the budget is, unfortunately, an important part of things. But we do have an alternative. This is artificial sinew. It's a modern material. It's a polypropylene or a dacron or something, and it's waxed, and it splits into very, very similar strands. And that will work very, very nicely to secure everything together strongly, but with the feel of the original sinew. So it's all about compromises. Progress is starting to be made. I'm going for a very simple whip stitch for the sewing. It's the sort of thing you can replicate quite well by using a small awl, whether it's made of bone or even sharp wood or flint, to poke a hole and then wiggle the sinew through. Although eye needles are known from a good, 50,000 years ago, so there's no real problem with that. I am, as I said, making many compromises, so I'm using a modern leather needle for these. But a straightforward whip stitch is working really nicely. And you can see the dark yoke starting to come together. Now, I'm not really cutting my pattern pieces in a very complicated way. I've tapered the side of this hide slightly, but when I assemble it, I'm not going to finish doing the bottom of the sleeve or the side here until I've got most of it put together. Then I'll be able to try it on, because it's got to fit a fairly wide range of people, and the last thing you need in a tunic is for it to be tight around the chest area or to bind under the arms. So I may end up needing to graft in a little bit of leather into the armpit area to allow for full movement, but I can do that as I go along. So far, so good. I'll sew up this bit next. I've got that first bit sewn in, and I was right, I'm going to need a bit of extra around the chest and the armpits. But this is all about contrast, it's all about showing off the beads. So rather than patch in with the ochre colour, I'm going to patch in with some of this dark, and I'm going to extend it up the underside of the sleeve. Now, my thinking is that as well as providing extra space for the person wearing it, I can sort of imagine this being worn around a campfire, maybe storytelling. Imagine somebody who's moving their arms around, who's moving their body with the beads as well. I'm hoping that this contrast is going to give us some really nice textural interest going on. So we'll sew that up, and I think we'll be about ready for a quick try on at that point. Well, good morning. It's day 2. We've done fairly well so far. I've got parts of the side seams sewn up. It's actually about 6 o'clock in the morning right now, because we're having a heat wave here in the UK, which means if you're like me and you've got really pale skin and you don't handle the heat well, I've got about an hour's work before I go and climb under a rock somewhere, find somewhere cool and shady. So we're going to have a quick try on, see whether this setup is working, and then I'm going to go and sit somewhere really, really shady and finish sewing it up today. Well, I like the way the shoulders sit. That's going to make a nice foil for all the beadwork. And you can see where I've patched in little bits of leather, and that big taper, I really like it. It is not based on anything at all apart from practical use of the hides that I had available and the overwhelming desire to put display into this. So the idea is that when it's being worn, there is a belt if that is desired, which will probably have beads on it as well. if the educator is explaining things or doing storytelling, hopefully with the beads that's extra drama. Now those sleeves, actually they're not a bad length now. I was going to put brown cuffs on them. I think for most people there's a long enough. That's fine, I can apply some bands and let's take that belt off. I've still got a lot of sewing up to do. So that's my job for today. Finish sewing up. Haven't decided yet what to do about the hemline, if you like. I can sew up most of the sides and then we shall decide whilst staying nice and cool. Lots of cups of tea, lots of glasses of water, trying to keep the cat off my lap. I've reached a point where I need to start patching in little gaps in the leather. So in itself that's quite straightforward, cut bits to size, sew them up, but you always get a bit of a ridge when you do this. So what I've done is I've damped the area in question, and then nice little hand stone. This is one that lives in my kitchen and you've seen it in other videos. Just give everything a little bit of a squash. And I'll do a bit more of that in a minute, but you should be able to see pretty much straight away how that flattens out the seams really nicely, so everything will sit much better when it's all patched together. So there's the bit that I've just hammered, and you can see here a section that I haven't done yet. It really does make a massive difference, and although you will see the seams when it's done, I'm not at all worried about that. You know, hides are hide shaped. If you want them to be people shaped, sometimes you've just got to patch little bits in. Halfway through day 2 and we are sewn up. I'm really quite pleased with the way this is sitting. There's areas that have been patched in, but they really don't detract, and this little lot is all that's left over from 5 deer skins. So a lot of skins went into this. Now what I'm hoping is that I've got enough scraps to get some sort of hat that will broadly represent this out of the leftover bits. But I do have a challenge because this hat's got to fit quite a wide range of people. So I need to find a way to make it adjustable. So I've got a plan. I know that most adult heads are somewhere between 22.5 and 24, maybe just a little larger. Most people can wear a hat that's somewhere in the 23-ish range without too much difficulty. So I've cut a long strip, which is just over 24 inches. And I've cut a circle that's a little bigger than I need with a split, because I'm going to slightly overlap it to give a slightly conical top. And to make it adjustable, because there's going to be beads on there as well, I'm going to use a chisel to make a series of holes, probably in 2 rows, and I'm going to thread a flat thong through. That will hopefully be another decorative feature, but it should mean that the hat can be just cinched up very slightly for smaller wearers. That's the theory. We'll have to put it into practice to see whether it works. Despite being quite happy about using modern tools in this, sometimes what you really need is a nice bone pokey stick. What I've found is, although I've punched the slots for this thonging, giving the holes a really good wiggle first does not make it easier to pull the strips through. There are some things you really can't improve on. And this is a bit of sheep leg bone, which I've had in my sewing kit for forever, really. It's one of my most useful tools. It gets used for all sorts of things, from basketry to wiggling holes to just generally poking things. Everybody needs a pokey stick. I think that worked. So, size adjustable. So if it's a little large for one of the education team, they just pull these in a little bit. Very slight, not quite conical top to it. By the time there are some canine teeth here and rows of beads here, I think that'll work quite nicely. And at the end of day 2, we've got a rather smart and at the moment very modern looking tunic in amongst the wider costume collection. And tomorrow morning I can start sewing on 5 5,000 beads. I'm so looking forward to that. It's the start of day 3 and it's time to start the beading. This little lot is 5,000 bone beads, mostly these little tiddly tiny ones. There's a few bigger ones for texture and there's a few little flattish ones. I've left them in the packets for now, mostly so that I can help allocate them across the tunic evenly. There's also going to be a fair few canine teeth and just the tiniest little bit of amber, and I've got a few more somewhere, probably some of these little golden periwinkles, just for a little bit of contrast. So I think I'd better get started. Well, that's the first 150 beads and 6 teeth sewn on. I started with a hat in a small way so that I could work out the best technique, and I think what's going to work best is using almost sort of back stitch technique and putting on 3 or 4 beads at a time so that I couch them down and the thread goes through really strongly. The last thing I want these to do is drop off on a site that has archaeological importance. Yes, it could all be sorted out eventually, but it could cause confusion in the short term, and that's really important not to happen if we can avoid it. So what I'm going to do is, on the stripes on the arms and the cuffs, I'm going to apply the beads to some strips first so that I can work them nice and tightly, really strongly, and then I'll whip stitch that down to the tunic. I think that's going to be a good way to start. We'll do those first, then we'll work up to that chest panel. First 1,000 beads down, 4,000 to go. I'm quite happy with this so far. We've got a nice solid fixture, and it's even relatively neat on the back. Time for a cup of tea and we'll do the next bit. At end of day 3, I've lost count a little bit, but I've definitely used up about 1,500 beads so far, and it's starting to take shape. So these bits aren't attached at all yet. They'll be put into place, and I'm hoping there'll be enough beads for one more row, and I'm hoping for a similar treatment at the cuffs. Belt, I'm going for slightly more spaced beads. So far I like it. Well, it's the start of day 4, very slightly cooler today. I hope that lasts. I've got really sore hands from beading yesterday, so I think today I'm going to focus mostly on some of the fancier bits of the beadwork. So although this is broadly inspired by the Sungir finds, it is being used in a British context. So I've been going through some of the books looking at different types of beadwork that are found around the world as well as in Britain, trying to find a sense of how I can tweak this to reflect things that we know we had locally. So I've been looking at things like pendants from Star Car. I've been seeing what's actually been found at Creswell itself. These ones aren't in Britain, but I've been looking at how beads made of shell at approximately the right time period have been suspended. There's a lot of information out there that I can use to help with this imagining, because we want this to be a discussion piece. Yeah, the whole point of a tunic like this is so that visitors to the site say, well, why have you done that? Why do you think they may have done that? So whether I put a row of teeth along here, because you do find an awful lot of canine teeth in Western European contexts. Tiny bit of amber we're thinking of, maybe just the one bit, just to talk about sort of trade and exchange networks. I must go and dig some more of them out. We love these little yellow periwinkles. These are really common on the beaches around Britain, and they've just got such a glorious colour, and shell beads are very well represented. So yeah, I think a few shell beads. I've got to work out where best to put the hole in these, both to be secure but also to represent what's going on in prehistory. So that's part of today's job. I've just decided whether I want that piece of amber or a slightly lighter piece. I've got a few different options, and we'll see how those go together. It's the morning of day 6 and I really want to finish the beading today. I'm doing fairly well. I reckon I've got another just over 1,000, possibly 1,500 beads to go. I've truly lost count, but it's feeling almost right. It's just possible I might not use the very, very last few of them. So I'm working on the cuffs at the moment. 5 nice strong rows there, and I'll bond this with a little glue to the cuffs before I sew down the edges, which will hopefully make them really strong. I'm particularly concerned that because these are going to be used in an education setting, everything's going to get handled quite regularly, so there's lots and lots of thread in this, as well as back stitching them on. I've worked all the way back through with an extra thread of artificial sinew. At the end of doing each row, hopefully that's going to make them robust enough to stand up to serious handling. I think we might be very, very nearly done. I've still not quite hit the 5,000 mark, but thinking about it, on the original burial, the trousers were decorated as well, and I'm not decorating the trousers in this case. So I think we're down to finishing touches. I've got some more amber here, not quite as shiny as the other bit. I'm thinking a few bits of amber around the edges here, maybe a little bit there. A couple of those yellow and ordinary periwinkle, I think those along the bottom. Maybe one more row here. Do you know, I've got a feeling that might just about do it. Hopefully the next picture you see will be the big reveal. Here it is. One Palaeolithic party tunic, hopefully finished. In the end there were probably 4,000 and a bit beads in there. I had planned for 5,000 originally, but as I mentioned, when I calculated, I'd allowed for the fact the original tunic had decorated legs to it. So this is the finished result. We've got a really good dramatic chest plate to it, really nice strong arms to it with a bit of drama, and a hat which hopefully the education team can adjust to suit their wearers. Whether it accurately reflects something that would have been happening in the Palaeolithic, well, that's a little bit trickier, isn't it? But this is all about questions. Yes, every single part of this is based on the most minute jigsaw pieces that I've put together using my best judgment. And I'll never pretend that we're going to have got it exactly right. But we will be able to say to visitors to the site, these are the materials, and this is why we've chosen them. This is the original source inspiration. This is why we've chosen it. This is how we've put it together. How have we done?